Hi all, and welcome to the Exploring Immersive Technologies for Serious Games panel. So today we're going to explore how immersive technologies actually amplify and complement serious games in general, and whether basically the future of serious games lies in these immersive technologies. So as we know, serious games are implemented for a variety of sectors. So we'll be exploring some use cases through a distinguished list of panelists. Charles, Malcolm, John, and Georgios, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could we start off with perhaps an introduction for each of you and basically the organization that you represent? Maybe Malcolm, shall you start yourself, please?
I can, and hello, welcome everyone, and Malcolm Barnes, company's Hollywood Gaming. We have another side to our business, which is Immersive Hollywood, which perhaps gives you a clue to where some of our interests lie. We've been involved in quiz and skill gaming for a number of years, and got involved in putting together a program around serious games. We were looking at mental health, a well-being application, particularly geared at actually very low-level tech. This was for parts of Africa, to give access to some of mental awareness techniques that were not available in that area where there's very, very little mental health support at all. So that's dumbing right down to very low levels of text-based information in order to provide a game for young people to be able to play. So that was kind of our background, and now we have a huge interest in looking at immersive technologies, particularly multisensory, and looking at how they can be applied to heighten senses and create new and innovative ways of particularly around learning.
Thank you, Malcolm. John?
Hey everyone. So my name is John. I'm the CTO and co-founder at Draw and Code, and we're an immersive experience studio. We've been going for about 10 years now, and we've been working kind of with game engines basically, which is essentially obviously what's underpinning anything in that kind of serious game space. And we do kind of projects ranging from kind of marketing endeavors is the kind of more trivial stuff, but then we kind of work in enterprise training, healthcare, and then a lot in entertainment in and around storytelling beyond the traditional kind of ways that we'd expect within video games necessarily. So we're quite broad in what we do, but games underpins everything. I think we don't particularly use the term serious games when we communicate. I think everything we do is underpinned by a real-time game engine, and that's kind of more how we define it, I guess. But it's great to be talking here today. So that's a little bit about us.
Thanks, John. Georgios, would you like to go?
Hello, everyone. Nice to be here. I'm wearing two hats, one an academic one, and then sort of entrepreneurs or corporate hat. I'll start with the academic one. I'm a professor and director of this place, the Institute of Digital Games at the University of Malta, where we teach and educate people in the principles of game design, development, and artificial intelligence, game technology. We offer master's education. Personally, I'm an AI researcher. And I deal a lot with game and simulated worlds and their intersection with artificial intelligence. Immersive technologies to a degree. I agree with John that every game is essentially a serious game, and basically we have been studying the development of such games for education, for health, and so on. My second hand is the one of co-founder of a company called Model AI, which is here. It's a company that utilizes AI for automatically testing games, any kind of game. That's all. Great to be here.
Thank you, Georgios. And last but not least, Charles.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I am the founder and principal of St. Martin's Institute of Higher Education. We were the first institute to introduce the concept of creative computing on the island way back in 2006. We work in direct collaboration with Goldsmiths College, which is also quite renowned in the UK for the creative aspects. And therefore, way back nearly a decade and a half ago, we were trying to see how computing can move away from the business modeling and data processing modeling into the creative area. Being a Maltese personally, I think I'm the only, except Mikhail, obviously, you are Maltese as well, but of all the panelists, I am the Maltese. We are literally living in a museum here. Our history, because the island is so small, but our history spans nearly 7,000 years. And literally wherever we dig, we find some prehistory or some historical artifact, etc. And therefore, it made a lot of sense that we would be interested in the use of computing to try and investigate better how to disseminate all the history that abounds on this island. And actually, we've been toying in, and I lead a research team with respect to immersive technologies on how to be able to explore and disseminate more our historical, mostly built artifacts and our cultural heritage. That's where my personal interest lies.
Thank you, Charles. So for all our listeners, please don't hesitate to ask questions either on the chat or on the Q&A portal. We're going to dedicate some time towards the end of the session to answer questions. But if there are pertinent questions that make sense for them to go into the current discussion, I'll be happy to field them as we go along. So on to my next question. So all of you, what drew you to game design in the first place, and how did it branch off into the sector that you're currently now working in? I mean, some of you have already answered this question, but maybe going back a bit, what's your background?
Shall I?
Go ahead.
You start, John. You start.
Okay, so when I was 6 years old, the story does start like that. My brother got a Spectrum, and this computer came into the house, and I was besotted. I couldn't believe this tiny little device plugged into the television, and then you typed away, and then things happened, and games could be played, and I could go on adventures, but all through text. And you see, this is kind of 1983, and really from that point on, that was the start of my obsession with computers. And I think it was kind of as I then progressed and eventually went and studied interactive media in the 90s, and kind of then I got quite interested in the physical world as well, and the way that humans and computers interface. And I think that kind of then took my journey in computing in a different direction. But the reality was, for probably the next decade after that, kind of going to university, there wasn't really the opportunities in the interactive entertainment space, and kind of multimedia wasn't really, it was not as well formed. You didn't have as many game engines and things. We were using tools like Flash, but essentially the kind of this fusion of interest in the physical world, computing and art and design, kind of amalgamated in sort of meeting like now co-founder of Draw and Code, and all of those obsessions that we shared, and that's kind of then driven into this: how do we fuse these worlds of computers and art, but also the physical world and humans, and like how does this all work in perfect harmony, sort of thing. And that was the beginning of my journey into this space.
Thanks, John.
It's quite interesting because suddenly people are going to realize the difference in our age between myself and John, because actually I was the person who brought a ZX Spectrum into my home. I was still about 15, and I remember we had our physics teacher who announced that if we wanted to, we could buy the ZX81 as a kit at the time. We imported this kit. We were about 12 boys. We imported this kit, and he actually assisted us to build this kit into this little ZX81. And therefore, I was the elder brother who would have provided it to John. Actually, I have my brother Pierre, and he used to play games. I've never been a gamer. Unfortunately, I missed that age since I was already 15, in which I could say that I am a gamer. In fact, up till today, at 58, I observe. I love watching people play games, but don't give me a joystick, because it's like, what am I doing this, wasting my time in front of a computer? That's why.
Never too late, Charles. It's never too late.
No, but maybe that's why, as an institute, as faculty, if I may say so, because all our students obviously go into the entertainment part of game design and development, but as an institute, we're more into the serious type of research. And for me, our historical culture is so very important. I would say, if I had the choice at this age, I would probably become an archaeologist instead of a computer scientist and an entrepreneur. But therefore, we're managing to showcase our students what it means to use leading edge technology, including VR, Oculus Rift, all these areas, and then allow them to use their imagination to build entertaining games, whilst we are trying to use this technology to present how hopefully the classroom of the future would be. Because teaching history, teaching geography, teaching all the mysteries of the world through books, that's all technology now. All our kids are today so much used to vlogs, video games, big screen televisions, color everywhere, that when you present them with a book, some of them say, what's this? Am I going to learn about the wonders of the world from a book? And that's hopefully where we want to lead to our research, and obviously our students will graduate and set up businesses to be able to provide this interesting teaching to students around the world, basically.
Thanks. Thank you, Charles.
Well, from a personal point of view, my interest has never been in the technology. I'm not a techie. There are other people much more qualified than me to do that. But I've always worked around technology, uses of technology in terms of how that makes things better, faster, easier for people to use, to understand. That's the real passion for me with technology. And I think, you know, in an immersive sense, technology is such a fantastic enabler to enable us to do things in a way that we've never been able to do before. Again, I'm old enough to go through the dot-com boom and bust years, which I was heavily involved in. It was very exciting around 2000, but the technology got in the way. It wasn't quick enough. People were still using dial-up modems. It was unbelievably slow. So people like me who wanted to engage audiences couldn't do it. There were too many barriers to entry. Those barriers for me are beginning to really move. There's a lot of interesting stuff that I know John and we're developing on at the moment in sort of more mixed reality type pieces, which would just open up another raft of opportunity. We'll perhaps come back to this later on. So my personal interest in games, I like strategy games. Those are the games I like to play. So most of those were pretty much PC-based, massive participation events where you played a server for a year. That's sad. And I love that type of stuff. So, you know, it kind of, in terms of serious gaming, is it? Yes, because you have to strategize, you have to work with other people. But for many of those games, you know, quite boring visually, and now again there's opportunities to make things really, really interesting. And I think, again, from an education point of view, and across heritage, I think there's some huge opportunities to begin to be able to start a whole education process with young people now that looks vastly different to the spoon-fed and stick approach that I had through my schooling years.
Thanks. Thank you, Malcolm. Georgios, would you like to add?
Sure. A brief comment on my end. I've been playing games since I was as far as I remember myself. I keep playing games. I love games of any sort. But I'm an engineer, so I did my PhD in artificial intelligence in Edinburgh, University of Edinburgh, and in there I'm in a pub. I'm doing a PhD in robotics. I'm in a pub, and then I have a fellow PhD student there talking about Quake 2 and how he can sort of integrate his wonderful AI algorithms within games. And back then I thought, what sort of a stupid idea? Why would anyone want to work, any serious AI researcher would want to work with games? I soon realized how wrong I was. And since that point onwards, I've been working with games, and I've been investigating ways we can advance artificial intelligence through games, and at the same time, advance games through the use of AI. So there's this vicious cycle that goes along, throughout the history of artificial intelligence, where games are put in the center of advancement. And all this vicious cycle can be transferred to education, and we can design games, co-design games with teachers, with learners, but also have AI assistants that help us design in that process, like computational creators of games, like AI-based sort of game design. And I think this is what I call nowadays the AI games co-revolution, because we experience an AI revolution as we speak, Industrial Revolution 4.0. At the same time, games are played from everywhere, from everyone, everywhere. So it is the right moment to actually open up this discussion, see how the two worlds can benefit from each other. So yeah.
Thank you, Giorgio. So let's jump into technology itself, right? So some of you have already mentioned quite a few tools that you use as part of your trade, whether it's VR or Oculus and so on. So can you just briefly go through what the use cases are in your respective areas and how you're actually using them, and also maybe elements of immersive technology that you are personally looking forward to further exploring and, that you're excited about coming up? Malcolm, would you like to start?
Sure. Well, we are, I guess, probably where most of our work currently is around the infrastructure that supports the immersive sector. So particularly multi-sensory technologies. So these are things like not just the visuals, but it's aiding your senses so that you get a much more immersed experience, I guess. So we're looking at uses of spatial audio, at live streaming 360 3D video. Well, we have a particular project underway for ecotourism, which would take a live feed from Rwanda, doing live 360 3D video. The guys on this panel will know just how difficult that is. No, we haven't figured it out yet. But that's something that we're working on in conjunction with universities. We want to implement also things like wind senses, temperature, sense of smell. We're even working on some areas around taste, and how it's interesting how some of those things have been used, again, working in collaboration with a local university, where they've used taste as a way of exploring sort of long COVID and things that can be done in order to re-trigger people's taste buds that have been taken away. So a lot around those senses, and for us, kind of as an immersed experience, everything starts around the narrative. It doesn't really matter for me whether that's a piece of heritage or it's for entertainment purposes. Everything starts with the storytelling that you're putting into that immersed experience. So for us, it's about hooking into that great narrative, working with really cutting edge studios like Draw and Code to help them facilitate that sort of vision for their customers and for people who want to use this technology. So that's kind of where we're at. So we're doing some stuff on, of course, on VR. The Quest has made an amazing change, I think, in terms of obviously untethered, has made some real advancements. We are doing some work on mixed reality. It's still early days, and John's probably much closer to this than I am. But obviously, there's some leading players coming in next year who will bring in some amazing UI, particularly one of them. So yeah, lots of exciting times ahead. It's quite cutting edge. The technology currently available on some of the mixed reality pieces, from a tech perspective, is pretty bad. It needs to improve a lot, but we can help through educating some of those developers.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to sort of say, I mean, leading on, I mean, going back to just where I began from, I started with a Spectrum, and that didn't put me off the fidelity. So kind of then leading into, yes, a lot of these technologies are new, but actually having said that, I think there's been some real rapid evolutions in things like virtual reality. So Oculus, obviously being owned by Facebook, has had a dramatic impact on, one, the kind of studios making content for it, and therefore, and the availability of the hardware and the price of the hardware. So all of those start to help other industries come online. So we're seeing a lot of other companies now saying we want to sort of look at uses of VR and as a within their business. So so we've been designing. Redesigning kind of spaces for people within their kind of within the VR headsets and things, like kind of very basic stuff, but it's become a sort of a tool for us. So even though we started out designing games, actually anything we do in the physical world now, we design and test everything. And even when we're designing AR, we'll often design it in VR. So interestingly, we're using VR as a very heavily from a tooling perspective, a testing, and testing out concepts with more complex things. So with the mixed reality hardware, that is the kind of the really exciting stuff that we're seeing. So, your Magic Leaps and HoloLens 2s and Nreal, which are a lightweight kind of glasses that you may have come across. And so the form factor's coming down with a lot of those, so that they're starting to get the fashion more on point, which is really going to be how these things kind of break into the mainstream a little bit more. And these aren't things that particularly you wouldn't think should be important to us talking today, but really for this to break out of anything so niche, these are the things that have got to kind of need to be addressed, I guess. But yeah, there's a whole host. I mean, even production techniques, we're using virtual production methods to create content. So again, using it's maybe not necessarily would always be seen as a use of serious games, but it's real-time engines for completely different use cases. So revolutionizing the kind of the film industries, and so some of the digital sets are being created in engines, and then even from a training point of view, that has incredible knock-on. So there's so many different technologies that we're now working with, and then we're starting to blend them quite heavily. It's a really, really exciting time.
Yeah, if I may continue exactly on what John has concluded. In fact, one of our biggest headaches at this moment in time is that even sometimes the technology lets us down. So remember that our research is being carried around a hypogeum, an underground labyrinth, which was a burial place 4,500 years ago. And although it is man-made, one could say it's man-made, but it was hewn out of live rock underground, and it was hewn out of caves, out of a combination of caves, and obviously prehistoric man continued to elaborate on this cave. So my team found a lot of difficulties, for example, when it came to try to immerse the audio in this place. This particular Hal-Saflieni hypogeum within itself is an instrument. So there is what we call the oracle's chamber, where if you have a tenor who is singing at a particular pitch, this whole labyrinth, literally the hypogeum itself, becomes a whole instrument. The echoes themselves becomes an instrument. I know that there is something of the sort in Constantinople, where there is the Great Mosque, but man-made, and it has been man-made a couple of hundreds back, whilst we are talking about a labyrinth which was developed nearly 6,000 years ago. So the principle is that we could not find any off-the-shelf software that could somehow mimic the audio once you immerse people in this VR experience. So we had to write the software ourselves to be able to get the right resonance and the right echoes of the building, as well as an experience. I'm told that we have the very latest graphic cards on our workstations. We have the most powerful CPU that one could imagine of buying, at least within our budget, in our budget. But remember that because we're giving a real-time exploration to the user, to the guest, where they can roam wherever they want. Therefore, you need to reprocess every scene with the movement of this particular guest. And also, we are after realism. In fact, it is not an artist rendition of the place, but actually, it has been developed through a point cloud that was lasered, that was captured through a laser point cloud, so that we would be able to provide full realism of the space itself. The space is a UNESCO heritage site where only up to 80 people are allowed down every day, and there's always the danger that it will be sealed, just like some of the Chauvet caves and the caves that we have in France and in Spain had to be sealed. So that is why we are putting so much effort into providing a virtual reality experience of something which is, if we can say, endangered.
Thank you, Charles. Before we get into some questions that we actually have on chat, Georgios, would you like to give us maybe an overview of your interaction with immersive technology, both at the university and also in your business?
Sure. When it comes to state-of-the-art technologies, we are focusing on two pillars, I would say. On one end, we are working with what is called largely creative artificial intelligence. So we are talking about generative systems that take form in what is called procedural content generation in simulated worlds. So you can think of entire worlds being generated by algorithms or in collaboration with designers. You can think of levels that have particular aesthetic elements or functional properties that they are coupled with particular sounds that they're generated with. They are coupled with narratives, rules of interaction. And that all takes place, obviously, can take place in an immersive environment for any purpose. That is one piece of technology that we're looking at. The second pillar is what we call user modeling or designer modeling in this particular case. So basically ways through multiple sensors that Malcolm was talking about that we can infer emotional states of the user, particular cognitive patterns, and utilize those in order to offer a personalized experience. One interesting, very, very recent case study that is under development is this EU project that we currently run that is called Prismark, in collaboration with Zaha Hadid Architects and other key players in the architect, engineering, and construction industry, where we offer a VR setting through which designers, architects, and so on can interact with artificial intelligence and design the buildings they want or they have envisioned. So this is exactly what we use at this point within the Institute of Digital Games in Malta. Now, within Model AI, we offer solutions so that whatever is generated is automatically tested for bugs, for glitches, and so on. So you have AI that tests things that AI or humans design, right, within the VR setting.
All right, thank you. So we actually have an interesting question from Marnie. She's asking, as an instructional designer, I am wondering how we can start incorporating VR into our classrooms. Do we have to partner with developers to make this happen? Does anyone want to take this?
Well, as I wrote the reply to Marnie saying it was a great question, it's probably fair that I should kick it off. I'm sure others will have plenty of things to say. Yeah, it's in thinking about this event today. I was thinking very strongly about kind of how we do educational pieces. So let me give you a hypothetical example. So the school trip, all right? So we all remember going on those, and they were, you'd go off to an historical site, say, and you'd go and experience that, and it could be quite dry. And you maybe have a sheet that you have to fill in that kind of shows that you've actually properly done it, not just gone to the local coffee shop. But so that was kind of the level of immersion, and I think there's a fantastic opportunity to do that kind of level of instruction. And I think particularly when looking at inclusivity for people from rather more disadvantaged areas who are not able to go and experience that firsthand, but can actually get into VR, not just see the sites, but hopefully get some of those senses. There's a great example in the UK of a Viking settlement, which is recreated. It's called the Jorvik Centre. I went there when I was about 7, and I still remember the smell in the Jorvik Centre. It was just absolutely incredible. So I think if you can recreate some of those things, absolutely amazing. And what I wanted to bring into the debate, and why I think it's such a good question, is who pays? Where, we as commercial organisations obviously have to see a return on that investment, and I don't know, but I just wonder where in education, where that sort of funding levels, where those funding levels are. Great that somebody else has put in the chat. They could smell the Jorvik Centre. It's not. I'd hate to be on my own, because otherwise that would have been terrible. But so yeah, it's kind of, how do we do this in a way that does benefit the majority, and not just a small number of people who perhaps are slightly more privileged. John, I don't know if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, we've actually been doing quite a lot of work with the Museum of Liverpool and their group of museums, and we worked with them on a recreation. It's basically a telling of the story of the Terracotta Warriors, where they'd brought a number of the warriors over, and they wanted to use immersive technologies to try and reinforce the kind of just the story piece. Because I think that a lot of the time you go to museums and these stunning artifacts, and you then spend your days reading tiny little panels either at the side or below, and not really engaging and immersing yourselves into these incredible artifacts. So we worked with them to kind of imagine what that museum experience would be like, and it's a huge success, really, commercial, and and it won kind of awards as well. And it was the first time that the museum had kind of done this kind of ticketed event and driven such high volume of numbers. I think it made 90 million pounds for the local economy, and it actually had put the museum in profit. But the reason I'm kind of talking about that is because actually we already have these incredible centres with all of these amazing stories and artifacts. And so I think that immersive technology short term should definitely be helping tell these stories. But I think that the challenge is that kind of digital divide. And if not every classroom has those VR headsets, then we are kind of creating almost this new digital class system. So where we see the kind of real opportunities is we've got these great cultural venues all over the world. And if we can reimagine what those venues are, I mean, the museums, for example, has 4 million art objects that aren't on display. And that's crazy. Like there's so many stories to tell. And if we make this digital, if we find ways, we blend Pokemon Go with museums, then suddenly it's a far more interesting thing for kids to kind of get engaged with.
Thank you for that, actually. And I agree completely. And that answers actually my next couple of questions around what educational institutions should be doing around this. And obviously there is the context of cost, because obviously VR headsets and everything around that and development of these educational materials obviously comes at a cost. Is this something that governments and policymakers at educational level should be looking at very seriously for the future? Someone in chat actually said, mentioned digital natives, and those are the upcoming generations. And as to the previous discussion around, school trips, for example, consider how more often something like that could actually happen, as opposed to having to go there physically, which obviously for a classroom of 20, 30 kids is obviously significantly more difficult, not to mention maybe additional challenges around that. So definitely, I agree. Maybe Charles and Georgios, you obviously being the education specialists here, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, to take your last statement, the physical visit to a museum, to a historical place, no technology can ever beat that. You're actually in the place where your ancestors would have been present hundreds or thousands of years. My favorite place, even at my age, is walking in the streets of our Medina, our old capital city. It's called the Silent City, and usually I walk it late evening. I won't say during the night, because late in the time some sort of ghost or goulash or whatever. But I love walking it in late evening. Why? Because I know that this particular Silent City is pristine. It has never been demolished and redeveloped. It's pristine. I know that the palaces there date centuries, and I know that whilst my footsteps are echoing in this Silent City, there must have been hundreds, if not thousands, of people who would have walked exactly the same street. All right, I'm walking on tarmac or particular paving. In the old days, they would have cobbles, and even in the old days, they would have had dirt. So visiting the place, we're never saying that computer modeling, VR systems, immersive technologies are there to somehow substitute the joy of being able to visit a place and really have all the sensory feelings of that particular place. But then what is missing, obviously, today is the learning behind it. So many tourists do visit Medina every year in Malta, but go back home and say, yes, we went to Medina, but they don't know that this Medina was the old capital city. It was about 3 times the size it is today, and it was the Arabs that contained it. It came all from the time of the Roman Empire when it conquered. All these stories are not there to be told, because it's a city. People live in it. Cars do drive in its very narrow road. So it's not a museum. It's still something that is live. There is also a question here on the chat line which speaks about the concept of AR and whether it's AR or VR, and whether in the case of an educationalist, how can we develop these immersive experiences to be able to enhance the learning. And even there's somebody who wrote from the psychological perspective and mental health perspective. And yes, like any other technology, you're going to have people that we train, and also the IDG, Georgios here, develops, that are the coders, that they are the developers. They won't be the people who know exactly what type of experiences they need to develop. We rely on the practitioners, on the psychologists, on the educationalists, on the teachers, on the historians, on the archaeologists. We depend on them to give us a very good idea and give us the analysis of what the experience is going to be about. But then it is up to the coders and to the designers to be able to develop these types of immersive experiences. One last thing I want to say in this intervention is we did have a little bit of trouble and problems with archaeologists, because everybody has been speaking about the story, the telling of the story. We're not being allowed to tell a story. With our own research, we are not being allowed. We are being continuously stopped from telling a story. And this is because there is a divide in the school of thought of archaeologists. Some archaeologists say, listen, we are historians and we have to interpret an archaeological space and build a story around it. But then there are the Puritans, which say, no, we're not allowed in any way to build any sort of imaginative story. We leave that for Hollywood. They do all the films and the movies and the scripts. Or we have to say, this is fact and this is the only thing we know. So obviously, the technologist always has to face this balance between what makes an experience exciting to the audience, but at the same time trying to keep true to the facts that you will have as remnants in today's world.
Agreed. Yes, go ahead, Georgios.
I have two short comments. The first one on the general topic of essentially how we bring all this technology into the classroom. I think that was the question originally. How do we actually engage and we bring this technology successfully in education, not necessarily in the classroom? The first comment is that, yes, as Charles mentioned here, it has to be a co-design process with domain experts, educators, pedagogues, architects, and so on. Second comment is deployment of these technologies is often hard. Especially when you go to school, sometimes there's no internet, not VR sets. I mean, we need to be a bit careful here. So deployment is really important. It has been a main issue when it comes to bringing any exotic technology to schools, especially in underdeveloped countries, within Europe even. I think ultimately we need to see any type of technology as a proof of as let's say something that is out there that we could utilize. An educator can actually has a palette of options.
An enabler, really.
Yeah,
that's the
exactly.
word, right?
Yeah. So it has a palette of options to pick from. One could be AR, one could be XR, and so on. But this, games could be another. Traditional ways of teaching could be another. And there's like a synthesis of different modes of interaction and learning. I think what excels learning, in my experience at least, as an educator.
Yeah, I think that kind of extending that point is that, the focus of trying to be agnostic. I think that there's the challenges in technology is often the case that the kind of companies, the technology that ends up in our hands, they are often heavily in silos, so if we're developing mobile AR experiences, which could be the sort of the easiest way that anyone might have an AR experience right now, we've got to kind of separate the way that we might create it for iOS and Android, and the feature sets aren't in parity, and then Android has thousands of different versions essentially, and so it becomes really difficult creating one seamless flowing experience for something and being as agnostic from a device, and therefore it makes it harder to actually generate revenue from, and therefore you're not going to get so many people building these products and making content for devices. So I think that's always the closer to mainstream these devices get, the better the content is for those kind of at-home markets. And I think that you are seeing things fairly agnostic to both device and medium. There's an application called spatial.io, and that allows for kind of collaborative spaces where someone could be in mobile, someone could be in VR, someone could be with a HoloLens on. So incredibly powerful from a learning perspective, because you could be in 3 different locations, 3 different mediums, and suddenly you've got this kind of something where you can all have the shared experience, talk about something, and it's incredibly powerful. So I think that's where we will see it. And even things like the hardware access, the glasses that we mentioned before, Nreal, they will be tethered first, so connect to our mobile phones as opposed to being a new device that we might need to all go out and buy. There's a bit of progression to kind of go through, I guess.
I totally agree, John. I think it's interesting coming back to Marnie's point on chat, asking whether we'd seen anything around, particularly for business school, around finance. I've got to be honest, I haven't seen anything in VR, but there's no reason why you couldn't use the medium of VR in a spatial environment that John has just mentioned, to have that sort of a different way of incorporating that classroom. You can still bring all the old techniques in there with whiteboards and all sorts of different stuff. So not gimmick, but actually showing sort of practical examples in a spatial environment, I think would be really interesting. Just wanted to quickly touch on the health pieces. I think we need to be really careful. Our limited involvement in looking at mental health was about trying to identify some of the triggers rather than providing clinical support. I think, you know, we need to be, some of the things I see in VR scare the life out of me in terms of being seen as being enablers. I think they're actually not. I think they could be extremely dangerous, and you know, we need to rely on clinicians to come up with the proper solutions rather than us as or people around the VR space in entertainment putting their spin on it.
Yeah, and actually on that same topic of Marnie's question around VR use in finance, does anyone maybe have any use cases that they might want to share? Some brain teasers? I mean, even simply speaking, I mean, most of the finance world really nowadays transacts conducts meetings through Zoom or Teams, even facilitating that through something a bit more interactive, like VR actually could by itself be an interesting use case. And we're here talking about, you know, at the very basics of use of a technology like that, right?
Yeah, I think something like spatial would be good, where the content is being kind of controlled by yourself. If it's just, you know, accessing some like a web page and an Excel browser, and you know, if you want, you can almost have infinite windows open around you. So if you need to get multiple people discussing different forecasts and different spreadsheets, then yeah, and you could also, you know, in that collaborative space, that could integrate with other technologies within the business. So, I mean, the reality is you're just looking at a web browser in a spatial context. So all that stuff just works natively. So they are very light use cases, but that we actually bought everyone in the business VR headsets so that we could have these sessions together, because those workshops where there's a feeling of presence and, you know, making some notes and like you can break off, it is necessary. I think it's, you know, we missed that when we all went remote. And so we're still trying to, it never beats the real thing. But I think that what we're seeing is there are opportunities that there are things that get us along a lot further than sitting in front of, you know, a load of rectangles of people's faces, essentially. You know, there is very little ways to interact on these kind of platforms yet. So I think the more and more mediums we can bring into it, suddenly the more immersive it will become. And we know that the more immersive, the more retention of information. So yeah, a lot to gain, really.
And I think you know, when some of the virtual spaces opened up, including spatial, they went for the big gimmick stuff rather than actually concentrate on what the hell it is they were trying to provide from a UI point of view. That's all changed, or it's beginning to change. It's still a long way to go, but I think there's some, that is just you know, a perfect way of using that sort of virtual meeting space. And ditto, our people have VR headsets and we meet virtually. It's a great way to share information. And I think there was a question about Apple AR glass. You're probably closer to that than me, John, but inevitably I'm an Apple user. So it will change the UI completely.
Yeah, and Apple will inevitably polish everything. Essentially, everything you see now, Apple will make it much slicker. Would be, but interestingly, they have staved off. They generally do stay away. They never create. They rarely create new markets. So they're kind of, there's also a huge problem with in electronic space and shortages of chips right now. So that also throws a few challenges into the mix, because obviously lots of people are looking at the immersive technologies, how they can improve. So amazingly, we've never seen more demand in this space, but there is also, we've got a limitation of time. There's a developer shortage almost, so that's an interesting thing. So encouraging more people back to the education point, it's kind of, we need to get more people excited. Like I was excited when I saw that computer. I think that there's too many people got complacent with the state of technology. It's just, oh, look, I've got amazing games consoles and isn't this fun? Whereas the early versions that I experienced weren't the complete products, and that gave me a different sort of insight that I don't feel like it kind of kids are getting today, and therefore aren't being driven into those creative and technical jobs, essentially.
Yeah, agreed. Georgios, do you want to say something?
Something short again, hopefully short. It's basically, I think what is crucial for me is, and we have seen it working with other technologies, is the democratization, in the sense that if you give tools to people to make things, they will make them. I mean, it happened with game engines. 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, we didn't have proper game engines, so only a few people could actually design games. These days, everyone more or less can design games. And people design wonderful games and very bad games. And then good games make it through and everyone plays them. I think that when we reach the point where technology is available to people at a decent price and people can actually make things with that technology, then we will see wonders. I truly believe on the bottom-up sort of creative approach when it comes to new technologies. And I think that will enable adoption of VR, XR more than it is out there currently. I mean, if you think about it, the European Commission invests millions of euros every year so that XR is adopted largely. We need more XR everywhere. It's just that I feel still we're not there, but we're getting there. It's just like we need to find revolutionary new ways to actually make that happen. And it will happen.
If I may ask a question myself, actually, however, do you think that adoption by the general population would actually find it hard? Like, actually have one experience myself where we were presenting this virtual reality visual of the country to try and get tourists into the country, right? And some people who were actually going through the VR experience actually said they felt nauseous or, agitated while in there, or I don't know, triggering things like fear of heights and all of that sort of thing. So you think those are challenges to adoption that are, seriously need to be considered as well. However, that because, not everyone maybe is that disposable for technology.
Yeah, I think the boundaries of adoption will be decided by people themselves. People will decide. I mean, as you said, maybe VR gradually finds its place somewhere. AR finds its place in other settings and so on. So I think it's people through the use and through the emerging technology that will eventually co-evolve as a symbiotic organism. Technology and people define where technology is going to be used, I think.
Yeah,
there are definitely issues, obviously, around usability of VR. It's why if you can pack as many multi-sensory experiences into that, it reduces, your brain manages to fill in the gaps. So that can have a major positive benefit. But yeah, there's still some challenges, and I think even around just general VR experiences, if you kind of go take your Quest and go off and look at the stuff that's generally available. It's all about how it can scare the living daylights out of you from a height perspective or something that's going to attack you, and it's not really terribly intelligent. And I think that kind of needs to change too.
Yeah, I think the really positive things are, 10,000 people working on XR at Facebook, and obviously you're seeing kind of that they bought a cloud AR company a couple of years back. It's called Scape, and that's essentially that will give them ability to kind of spatially localize. Well, essentially, kind of it's a visual positioning system, so it allows you through kind of visual data to localize any point on Earth within kind of fairly sub-centimeter, basically. And now they've got that, they're essentially mapping it. So their glasses will be able to kind of always know exactly where you are through the computer vision, not just tying in other things like GPS and everything. So there's huge amounts of money going into those things. And that, I guess there's, you could question whether you'd want Facebook to be doing these things, whether they are, whether what we expect that to look like. But hopefully they've learned their lessons from their experiences through social media and the disruption they've caused there. Disruption is not always good. So it's just being careful about a lot of these new technologies we're introducing into the world and being understanding that. So it's the points where they enter, and also making sure that the platforms, the way we're developing, doesn't exclude people from experiencing it. There's a lot of the brain controller interfaces, and there's another wrist controller that can remap movement. Essentially, you could control a limb that's not there with this essentially device that Facebook are kind of been testing, and it's things like that. So suddenly someone who has maybe lost multiple limbs could go into VR and be able to have a full experience, being able to kind of use those virtual limbs and be able to retrain and do things. And actually, they could be operating, and that could be using 5G remote controlling a robotic somewhere else. So therefore, they are back doing their job, controlling it via whatever the input might be. So it's these technologies. There's a long way to go, but it's world changing, and it's not just for the few. I think the key is making sure that this is kind of taking humanity on a journey.
As we said, technology is always an enabler. It's not an end in itself, and it's just a question that people need to need to actually realize and find ways how to best use that enabler. It can be used in anything from health to education to tourism to anything that you can think of. So it's just a question of finding the way of how to exploit it, and the person who does that first is going to reap those rewards. So we're gearing up towards the end of the session. So if you have any final questions, or maybe any of the panelists would like to send some concluding thoughts.
Yeah, basically, this has been fantastic. This has been a great hour, because obviously, even during this hour, listening to and especially reading questions and comments in the chat, and this is how the application of immersive technology will evolve, by bringing in so many people with different backgrounds and different imaginations and visions and dreams, getting them together with the technologists. And this is how technology will evolve. Probably maybe in the oldest of all this panel, I've seen computing really at its initial stages. And decade after decade after decade, it's like pushing the boundaries, breaking the boundaries of what we could do with computing. And then these boundaries have been broken because people tend to dream things and try to do them. And all aspects throughout the world, each pushing towards trying to move these boundaries. So I hopefully will be able to meet again next year, and we will see some great developments that would have taken place even during these COVID times, these hopefully to forget COVID times.
Fair enough. We actually have a question coming in from Chris, asking whether anyone has any thoughts on how adaptive some of these technologies can be for persons with disabilities. For example, the problem with VR not being very, people with maybe visual impairments might be an issue. So any ideas around that?
I mean, that same computer vision system that I was talking about that Facebook have with Orion, which essentially can localize anywhere. Just because it's not, the output isn't a visual one, you could still have an outputs that were audio based that could essentially identify parts of, safe places essentially. So you can use audio, essentially take audio cues from real world positions to then sort of tell you if you're in danger or not. And again, it would obviously require a language. I think they do that in Japan, the stations, Tokyo, the stations have different sounds so that people without hearing can know their station by a tune as opposed to, looking to visually see it. So I think kind of spatial audio is incredibly powerful. I think some of these, the hope would be, and I say hope, whether this is something you'd hope for, I guess that people will be looking at trying to tap into the visual cortex and trying to bypass the eyes as the interface. But again, these are probably a bit more sci-fi based questions for the future. But there are people working on that we're aware of. So.
Thanks, John. Well, I think we've overrun by a bit, so it's probably best to stop this very interesting discussion here, unfortunately. Although, obviously, I'm sure that you can reach out to any of our panelists, and obviously you can keep on discussing in chat certain things. So please actually do that. To close off, I'd like to just thank Games for Change and Gaming Malta for the opportunity for this space and for giving us the opportunity to listen to these very learned and very obviously experienced people. So thank you very much. And thanks also to all of our listeners for a very interactive chat, something that's very encouraging to see. So thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.